The second I smelled that fuel pooling under the car, I knew we had maybe 90 seconds. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly prepared for, was that the most dangerous thing on that freeway that afternoon wasn't the fire. It was the man standing 20 feet away, watching me work, with his arms folded and his jaw set, like he'd already decided he had a problem with me before I'd said a single word. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, before you keep watching. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely want to know. And if this story hits you the way it hit me living it, subscribe. Because what happened after that day on the I-10 overpass changed my life in ways I'm still unpacking. Okay, let's go. My name is Maya Reeves. I've been a firefighter for 14 years. Station 9, Los Angeles County. And I want you to understand something about me before we get into any of this. I did not grow up dreaming of this job. I grew up in Inglewood, California, in a 2-bedroom apartment with my grandmother, who worked nights at a nursing home and still somehow managed to have breakfast on the table every single morning when I came downstairs. She used to say, "Maya, you got 2 things nobody can ever take from you, what you know and what you're willing to do about it." I didn't understand that until I was about 30 years old, standing in front of a burning house at 2 in the morning, knowing exactly what needed to be done and doing it anyway. That's the job. That's always been the job. I'm one of a small number of Black women at Station 9. I don't say that to complain. I say it because it's context. Context matters. You'll understand why in a little while. My husband, Darius, is a civil rights attorney. We've been married 11 years. We have a daughter, Imani, who is 10 years old and already has more opinions than both of us combined. Darius and I joke, and I mean we genuinely laugh about this over dinner, that between the two of us, we have seen every single way a system can decide it doesn't want to deal with you. He's seen it in courtrooms. I've seen it in firehouses. We thought we were past the worst of it. We thought we were in a season of just living. We were wrong. The morning of October 14th started like every other shift. I woke up at 5:15, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the dark for 10 minutes before anyone else in the house was moving. That's my ritual. That quiet before everything starts. Darius was still asleep. Imani had a permission slip on the counter that I signed without reading closely enough, which she reminded me about later with a very specific kind of 10-year-old energy. I did my gear check at the station by 6:45. Said my quiet prayer the way I always do before a shift. Not loud, not performative, just me and whatever is listening. My partner that day was Tyler Brooks, 26 years old, 18 months on the job, the kind of rookie who asked good questions and didn't talk just to fill silence. I liked him a lot. We were 40 minutes into the shift when the call came in. Multi-vehicle accident, I-10 westbound overpass at Crenshaw. 4 cars involved, possible entrapments, 1 vehicle fully engulfed. Tyler was already moving before Captain Okafor finished relaying. I was right behind him. I need you to understand what an overpass accident looks like from the cab of an engine when you come around the curve and it comes into view all at once. It's not like in the movies. There's no dramatic music. There's just a wall of black smoke rising up against a blue sky, the smell hitting you even through the windows, and your body doing this thing where it narrows everything down to information, not fear. Information. What's burning? How many vehicles? Where the people are? What you have and what you need. What I saw. A pickup truck against the center divider, driver's side caved in. An elderly woman visible in the passenger seat, moving. A silver SUV spun sideways, both airbags deployed, driver stumbling out on his own already. A black sedan rear-ended and smoking, but not fully involved. And then, directly ahead, up against the concrete barrier, a white Honda. I don't know how to describe the inside of that car to you without making you feel it. The whole front end was gone. The hood had folded up like paper. Flames were coming through the dashboard seam, up through the center console, and crawling toward the door panels with that specific patient determination that fire has when it's found a path and decided to take it. Through the smoke-black window, I could see a woman in the driver's seat, head slumped, seatbelt locked tight across her chest. And in the back seat, a car seat, a baby in it, maybe 14 months old. His little face turned toward the window, mouth wide open, not making a sound that I could hear from outside. Silence from a baby in that situation is not a good sign. I made my call in the time it takes to inhale once. I looked at Tyler, the pickup, woman trapped, looks conscious, go. He nodded and went. I ran toward the Honda. I was aware of people on the overpass railing above me, drivers who had stopped, passengers out of their cars, phones already up. I was aware of the heat, which was serious and getting worse with every step. I was aware of the gasoline on the asphalt, black and shimmering in the afternoon light. I was aware of all of it. I cataloged it. And then I put it in a compartment and I did my job. The driver's door handle was locked, frame warped from the impact. I pulled my Halligan bar, set the fork into the door seam, and put everything I had into it. Metal screamed. The door buckled. One more pull, and it tore open. The smoke that came out made my eyes sting even through my mask. The woman inside, I would learn later her name was Rosa Vega, 29 years old, dental hygienist, originally from Guadalajara, stirred at the rush of air. She had a gash at her temple, blood tracking down the side of her face, but she was breathing. Her seatbelt had locked and pinned her at a bad angle, pressing into her ribs. I could hear the fuel line hissing somewhere beneath the chassis. That sound, if you've ever heard it at close range, is not something you forget. It is a countdown that doesn't announce what number it's on. Ma'am? I kept my voice low and steady, the way you do. I've got you. Don't move. I'm going to cut this seatbelt and we're going to go together, okay? She made a sound, not words, but something that meant she heard me. I cut the belt with one motion, caught her weight with my other arm, turned my body to put myself between her and the heat, and walked her out of that car. 10 steps, 15, far enough. I laid her down on the asphalt, checked her airway, checked her pulse steady. She was going to be okay. Then I went back for the car seat. I want to tell you something about that moment because people ask me about it sometimes. How it felt going back in, knowing the fuel line was hissing and the fire had maybe gained another 6 inches while I was moving Rosa. Honestly, I didn't feel anything dramatic. I didn't have some cinematic moment of courage. I just thought there was a baby in that car. And then I went. That's the whole story. The job is the job. The baby, Rosa's son, Marco, was crying by the time I reached him. Loud, furious, full-lunged crying that I will tell you right now is one of the most beautiful sounds I have ever heard in 14 years of this work. Crying means breathing. Crying means alive. I unclipped the harness, lifted him out, walked back to where Rosa was lying on the asphalt. The crowd above erupted. I could hear applause and shouting coming down from the railing, and I barely registered it. I was already kneeling beside Rosa again, checking the baby for injury, watching his color, watching his breathing. He had stopped crying. He was staring up at me with these enormous dark eyes, one small fist wrapped around the strap of my gear, and I thought, okay, they're both okay. You did it. I exhaled just once, just for a second. That's when I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Coming from the direction of the police cruiser I hadn't even noticed was parked back behind the scene. I looked up. The officer walking toward me was broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-30s, with the kind of walk that said he owned whatever ground he was standing on. Jaw tight, eyes flat. He wasn't looking at Rosa Vega bleeding on the asphalt. He wasn't looking at Marco in my arms. He wasn't looking at the Honda, which was still burning behind me. He was looking at me, and there was something in his expression that I recognized. I want to be honest with you about that. I recognized it, not because I'm paranoid, not because I see problems where there aren't any, but because I have lived in this body for 39 years. And I have been in this profession for 14 of them, and I know the look of a man who decided he had a problem with me before he understood what I was doing. It is a specific look. It has a specific texture. I knew it the moment I saw it. His name tag read Malone. He stopped 3 feet from me. He didn't acknowledge Rosa. He didn't acknowledge Marco. He looked at me like I was an obstacle. You need to clear this area, he said, right now. These vehicles are my scene. I passed Marco carefully to a bystander who had rushed forward. A heavy-set man in a work vest who took the baby with steady hands like he'd done this before, or maybe just like some people simply rise to what a moment needs. Then I stood up slowly and turned to face Malone. "Officer." I kept my voice even. Professional, the voice I use when I need someone to hear facts and not feel attacked by them. The fuel line on that sedan has not been secured. The fire is not fully suppressed. Nobody goes near that vehicle until my crew clears it. That is protocol. His eyes narrowed. I didn't ask for a lesson. I said clear the area. I understand that, and I will, once the scene is safe. Give us 10 minutes. Something shifted in his face. Not anger exactly. Something flatter than anger. More deliberate. The kind of thing that lives in a person and doesn't need much invitation to come out. "You don't give me timelines," he said. His voice dropped. "You don't give me anything. You move when I tell you to move." I said nothing. I stood between him and the burning car. That was my job. That was the only job that mattered in that moment. He stepped to his right, moving to go around me. I stepped with him, same direction, no contact, no aggression, just a body between a reckless decision and a live hazard. He stopped. His nostrils flared. "Are you serious right now?" His voice went low and careful, the way some people's voices go when they've decided something. "You're really going to stand there and block a law enforcement officer?" "I'm standing in front of an unsecured fuel line," I said. "You're welcome to wait 30 feet back." I knew, even as I said it, that it was the exact wrong thing to say to a man like this. Not because it wasn't true, because it was true, and he knew it was true, and that's what made it unbearable to him. He looked up at the overpass railing and at the phones, all those phones, and then he looked back at me. And the thin performance of authority on his face just dropped away. He moved fast, not toward the car, toward me. He grabbed my wrist, yanked me sideways, spun me hard. My first instinct was to pull back, and I killed it immediately. I killed it in the same half second it was born, because I knew exactly what resistance looked like on 6 different camera angles. So I didn't fight it. I let my body turn. The handcuffs came out. 1 click, then 2, cold metal over my rescue gloves, over my gear locked tight behind my back. The crowd above went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The specific silence of people who need an extra second for their brains to accept what their eyes are seeing. I stood beside Malone's cruiser in full firefighting gear. Turnout coat, air pack, helmet hanging at my side, with my hands cuffed behind my back. Behind me, the Honda was still burning. Tyler had frozen with a hydraulic tool in his hand, staring at me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 18 months. Somewhere to my right, Rosa Vega was being helped by a bystander, asking something in a panicked voice I couldn't make out. Malone straightened his collar. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Malone. I have a combative firefighter detained at the scene, requesting a supervisor." Combative. I heard the word land. I felt what it was designed to do, the image it was meant to put in people's minds, the story it started telling before anyone could ask a question. And I stood completely still, shoulders back, chin level. I breathed through my nose, slow and controlled, the way my grandmother taught me a long time ago in a completely different kind of hard moment. Don't give them the version of you they're looking for. 6 phones were pointed at me, maybe more. I was aware of all of them. I was aware of Rosa being loaded onto a stretcher by paramedics who had just arrived. I was aware of Marco crying again from somewhere behind me. I was aware of the fuel line that still hadn't been cleared because my crew had stopped moving entirely to watch what was happening to me. I was aware of all of it, and I stood still and I breathed, and I waited. And then I heard a vehicle pulling hard off the freeway ramp. A door. Boots on asphalt. A walk I would know anywhere, measured, deliberate, each step carrying the full weight of someone who had never once needed to hurry to make a point. Captain Diana Okafor had arrived. She didn't look at Malone first. She looked at me. And in the fraction of a second before her expression went completely professional and blank, I saw something move across her face. Not shock, because Diana Okafor did not shock easily, but a hot, controlled recognition that told me she understood exactly what she was looking at and exactly what she was going to do about it. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone, scrolling for a number she had never once used for anything small. I stood in the afternoon heat with my hands cuffed behind my back, in full gear, in front of 7 phone cameras and a crowd of people who had gone completely silent, and I watched Captain Okafor put that phone to her ear. I have watched Diana Okafor walk into a lot of situations in my career: burning structures, collapsed ceilings, a gas main rupture on a residential block that made grown men take 3 steps back. She has never once adjusted her pace for any of it. Whatever the situation demanded, she was already moving at exactly the right speed before she got there, like she calculated the distance between where she was and where she needed to be, and simply decided that running would be a waste of energy better spent thinking. She made 1 phone call, 45 seconds maybe. I couldn't hear the words from where I was standing, but I didn't need to. I knew from the way she turned slightly away from Malone when she dialed, not from nerves, but from the deliberate exclusion of him, that whoever she was calling was not going through any official channel that he could monitor or delay. Malone noticed. I watched him notice. He took a step toward her. "Hey, whatever you're doing, you need to stop. I have authority over this scene, and your firefighter interfered with—" Okafor held up 1 finger without turning around, not dismissively. Just the firm, wordless language of someone finishing a sentence that mattered more than his. Malone stopped mid-word like the air had gone out of him. In 14 years, I had never seen a man stop talking because of 1 finger. I filed that away. She hung up. She turned around. She looked at Malone with the expression of a woman who had survived 30 years in a profession that spent its first 20 trying to convince her she didn't belong in it. No heat, no performance, just the specific calm of someone who had already seen the end of this particular road and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "The fire chief is on his way," she said. "I'd suggest you stay right where you are." Malone's jaw shifted. "Lady, I don't answer to the fire department." "No," she said, "but the fire chief answers to the city council. And the city council answers to the cameras up there." She glanced up at the overpass railing, at the phone still recording, still pointed directly at me, standing in handcuffs in full gear. Then she looked back at him. "So does everyone here today?" She walked over and stood beside me without another word. We waited together in the afternoon heat, and I want to tell you what that felt like. Having her next to me, not saying anything, not explaining herself, not trying to fix the situation with words, just standing there as a statement, as a fact. It felt like being handed something solid in the middle of a room that had no floor. 11 minutes later, 2 vehicles came off the freeway ramp fast and pulled onto the overpass with an authority that parted the rubbernecking traffic like it had somewhere more important to be. Fire Chief Alan Hendricks stepped out first, silver-haired, still in his dress uniform from whatever meeting we'd pulled him out of, moving with the quiet weight of a man who had been doing this job for 36 years and had long ago stopped needing to announce himself to be heard. Behind him, a news crew that had apparently been following his vehicle spilled out onto the overpass. A camera came up before anyone said stop. Hendricks walked directly to Malone. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked only at the officer in front of him, and his voice was low and unhurried and carried the specific quality of someone who has never once in their life needed to be loud to be taken seriously. "Son," he said, "take those cuffs off my firefighter, right now." 3 full seconds. I counted them. Malone's hand stayed at his side, his eyes cutting sideways to the camera and back. I could see the math happening behind his face, the fast, desperate arithmetic of a man looking for a version of this situation where he still came out ahead. He didn't find one. His chin lifted once, one small reflex of a pride that had nowhere left to go. And then something in his posture gave. He pulled out his key. He stepped around Hendricks without a word and came to where I was standing. He inserted the key. The cuffs released with a click that sounded, in the sudden stillness of that crowd, like the loudest thing I had ever heard. The overpass erupted. cheering, shouting, the full uncontained noise of people who had been holding their breath and just got permission to let it out. I brought my hands forward slowly. I rolled my wrists. I looked down at them for exactly 1 moment, at the red marks the cuffs had left over my gear. And then I looked up. "Thank you, Chief," I said. Then I turned away from Malone, away from the cameras, away from all of it. And I walked back to the Honda. Because the fuel line still hadn't been cleared, because the job still needed finishing, because that was the only answer I had that was worth anything. I want to tell you what the next 3 days felt like, because I think people sometimes imagine that when something like this happens and a crowd cheers and a chief shows up and the handcuffs come off, that's the end of it. You go home, you process, you move forward. That is not what happened. The first day was almost normal. Debrief at the station. Statements taken. Okafor gave me a look when I came in the next morning that said everything she wasn't allowed to say in front of a room full of people. Tyler made coffee and put a cup on my locker without being asked. The younger guys, Ramos, Kim, Fernandez, found reasons to be busy near wherever I was working, which is the Station 9 version of asking if you're okay. I filed my complaint with Internal Affairs that afternoon. Darius drove me. He sat in the parking lot while I went in alone, and when I came back out and got in the car, he looked at me and said, "How'd it go?" "Fine," I said. "Routine. They took the paperwork." He nodded slowly. Then, "Did they give you a case number?" I showed him the receipt. He looked at it for a long time. I didn't understand why until later. The second day, nothing. The third day, nothing. A week passed. Okafor called the IA office on Thursday and was told the investigation was ongoing and they couldn't discuss active cases. She called again Friday and got the exact same answer from a different person using the exact same words. Not similar words. The same words like they were reading from a card someone had written specifically for this situation. She told me about it over the phone that evening, and something in her voice was careful in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "Maya," she said, "call Darius tonight." I did. He listened to everything without interrupting, which is what he does when he is paying attention at the deepest level. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "They didn't ask you a single question about Malone." "What?" "When they took your statement when IA called last week, did they ask you about anything Malone did? Or did they only ask about you?" I went back through it in my head. The intake officer asking about my tone at the scene, whether I'd made physical contact before Malone applied the restraints, whether I had a history of disagreements with law enforcement at multi-agency incidents. Every single question had been about me. "Come home," Darius said. "I need to show you something." He had been at the kitchen table for 3 hours when I got there. I could tell by the coffee cups. He lines them up on the far edge of the table when he's deep in something and stops noticing them. There were 2. His laptop was open, a legal pad beside it covered in handwriting so small and dense it looked like architecture. He turned the laptop toward me. Deputy Chief Warren Malone, Head of Internal Affairs Oversight, West Bureau, Los Angeles Police Department. "He runs the Oversight Division," Darius said, "the exact division that received your complaint. Every supervisor in that chain answers to him. The IA officer who called you, the one with the charming questions about your tone. His direct supervisor reports to Warren Malone." He let that sit for a breath. "Garrett is his nephew." I sat down. I want to try to describe what it feels like to understand something like that. Not all at once, but in layers, the way cold water rises around you rather than hitting you from above. You filed your complaint into the hands of the man whose job it is to protect the officer you're complaining about. Every question asked about your behavior, nothing asked about his. And you thought you were using the system. You thought the system was working. And what was actually happening, what had been happening from the moment you handed over that paperwork, was something else entirely. Darius opened a second folder. 2 prior complaints against Garrett Malone, a paramedic in Culver City 18 months ago, a county EMT 2 years before that, both filed with IA, both closed within 60 days. Finding insufficient evidence. He tapped the first one. This complaint came with a written witness statement from a second EMT who was standing 10 feet away when Malone got physical. He tapped the second folder. That statement is in the original file. It was never entered into the formal record before the closure was signed. "Someone pulled it," I said. "Someone pulled it." I looked at my husband across the kitchen table, the man who had spent 11 years watching me come home from 24-hour shifts smelling like smoke and still somehow always had dinner warm and Imani bathed and homework done, who had built his entire career around the belief that the law was a tool that belonged to everyone, not just the people who already had power. And I saw something in his face that I didn't see often. Not anger. Anger was too simple. It was the controlled, focused recognition of someone who had just confirmed the shape of what they were dealing with. "They were never going to investigate Malone," I said. "No," he said, "they were building a file on you." This whole time. The kitchen was very quiet. Imani was asleep upstairs. Through the window I could see the neighbor's porch light and the dark shape of the jacaranda tree we'd planted the year she was born. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, and nothing felt the way it was supposed to feel. "So what do we do?" I asked. Darius picked up his pen. "We build something they can't dismantle, but Maya and Omokintish, I need you to do something very hard right now." "What?" "Nothing. You say nothing. Not to your crew, not to anyone who might say something to someone who says something online. You go to work, you do the job, and you let me dig." I looked at the table, at his notes, at the 2 empty coffee cups at the edge. "How long?" "Give me a week." I gave him a week. I'm not going to pretend it was easy. I am not a person who is wired for stillness when something is wrong. I go toward things. I always have. Sitting on information while a machine works quietly against you is a specific kind of hard that I don't have a clean word for. It sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't move no matter what you do with your hands. I went to work. I checked my gear. I ran calls. I ate meals in the common room and answered questions and laughed at the right moments and showed nothing, because showing it wasn't going to help, and I knew it, and so I held it. Okafor pulled me aside on Thursday. Not her office, the hallway outside the equipment room, which meant it was something she didn't want in any official space. "Darius find anything?" she asked. "He's still working." She nodded. "Then I got called upstairs yesterday." Assistant Chief Morris. He told me in very careful language that my personal involvement in this matter was creating complications." She paused. He used the phrase, "levels above his pay grade." "What did you say?" She looked at me the way she looks at things she has already decided. I said, "Understood, sir," and I went back downstairs and I emailed everything I had directly to Darius. A beat. "Everything, Maya, every name, every note, every contact I've made since the day this started." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "They told you to back off. They suggested it." She almost smiled. "I heard them. I just didn't listen." The certified letter came on a Tuesday. Not from LAPD. Not from Internal Affairs. From the County Risk Management Office. I was in the kitchen when Imani came home from school, backpack half on, earbuds around her neck, already talking before she was fully through the door. She dropped the envelope on the counter without looking at it and opened the refrigerator. "Certified letter, Mom. Had to sign for it. Also, we're out of the good orange juice. There's apple in the back." "Apple juice is not orange juice. That is factually true," I said, and I turned off the stove. And I picked up the envelope. I read it once, fast. Then I read it again, slowly, because the first time through I was certain I had misread something. I hadn't. 2 violations cited against me by name, interference with law enforcement operations, creating an unsafe condition at an active emergency scene, a recommended suspension of 90 days without pay, effective pending the outcome of a formal disciplinary hearing before the fire department's oversight board, a hearing date to be scheduled within 30 days. I set the letter face down on the counter. "Dinner's ready," I said. My voice came out completely normal. I was proud of that. I waited until Imani finished eating and went upstairs to do her homework. I waited until I could hear the specific creak of the 3rd floorboard outside her room that told me she'd settled in for the night. Then I picked up the letter, walked to the back porch, sat down in the dark, and called Darius. He was still at his office, and though I could hear the city through the window behind him when he picked up, I read him the letter. Word for word. I didn't editorialize. I didn't add anything. When I finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. "Maya," he said. His voice had that quality it gets when he's 3 steps ahead and needs me to trust the distance between us. "Listen to me carefully. This letter did not come from nowhere. Risk management doesn't move on active first responders without a push from somewhere inside a department with reach. Someone made a phone call and made this happen." A pause. "This is retaliation, and they were counting on it arriving before you had enough of a foundation to fight back." "Did it?" I asked. "Arrive before we had enough?" "No," he said, "because I spent the last week making sure it wouldn't." I leaned back in the chair. Above me, the sky was the dark amber color that Los Angeles calls night. A helicopter moved across it, slow and red blinking, and I watched it until it disappeared behind the roofline. "Tell me what you have," I said. "Not on the phone," he said. "Tomorrow morning, Amber Chen's office. She's a civil rights attorney, sharp. I trust her completely. The 3 of us sit down together, and we build this right." "Darius." "Yeah. They suspended me for saving a woman and her baby from a burning car." The line was quiet for a moment, then softly, "I know." "Okay," I said. "Tomorrow morning." I sat on the porch for a while after we hung up. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't somewhere close to it, but because the feeling in my chest wasn't grief. It was something harder and colder than grief, something that had a direction to it, the specific feeling of a person who has just been shown exactly what they're dealing with and has decided with complete clarity that they are not going to let it stand. I thought about my grandmother, about what she used to say, what you know and what you're willing to do about it. I went inside. I went upstairs. I looked in on Imani. She was asleep with her textbook open on the pillow beside her, one hand curled under her cheek. I stood in the doorway and watched her breathe for a moment, the way you do when something feels uncertain and you need to find the thing that isn't. Then I went to bed. And for the first time since the afternoon on the I-10 overpass, I slept without waking up once. Not because things were better, because I finally knew the shape of what I was fighting. And knowing the shape of something, even when it's big, even when it's ugly, is always better than standing in the dark guessing at what's there. Amber Chen's office smelled like old paper and black coffee, and the morning light came through the blinds in thin yellow stripes that fell across a desk, so covered in folders and printed records that I couldn't see the surface underneath. There was an org chart taped to the wall beside the bookshelf, names circled in red ink, lines drawn between them, in a way that made the whole thing look less like a legal document and more like someone had mapped out the anatomy of something diseased and were trying to figure out where the rot started. Darius had described Amber to me on the drive over. 43 years in civil rights law, taught at UCLA for a decade before deciding she'd rather be in the fight than describe it from a distance. He'd worked against her once, early in his career, in a case he'd rather forget. He said she had dismantled his entire argument in under 6 minutes and done it so cleanly that he'd wanted to applaud despite himself. That was the version of her he wanted in our corner. She was already standing when we walked in, not waiting for us. Working. She had a mug in one hand and a printed document in the other, and she was reading while she stood, the way people read when sitting down would feel like wasting time. She looked up, set both of things down, and shook my hand with the direct, no-ceremony grip of someone who considered pleasantries a tax she had stopped paying a long time ago. "Sit," she said. "I want to hear everything. Start at the overpass." I told her everything, same way I've been telling you. Start to finish, facts first, nothing skipped. Darius sat beside me and said nothing, which is one of the specific skills of a man who knows when his job is to let his wife speak. Amber didn't interrupt. She wrote on her legal pad in that small, dense handwriting, and when I finished, she set the pen down and looked at me for a long moment with the expression of someone who has heard a great many stories of systems behaving badly and is deciding where this one ranks. "Tell me about the prior complaints against Malone," she said to Darius. He walked her through what he'd found. She asked 4 questions. 3 of them I didn't fully understand. They were procedural, technical, about IA closure timelines and supervisory signature requirements. The 4th one I understood completely. Is the suppressed witness statement still in the original file, or was it physically removed? Still there, Darius said. Someone forgot to pull it before closing or decided they didn't need to. It's dated. It's signed. It's just never been acknowledged in any formal finding. Amber nodded slowly. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and uncapped a red pen. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. What followed was 2 hours at that desk that I think about sometimes when people talk about the idea of fighting a system, because it doesn't look the way movies make it look. There are no dramatic speeches. Nobody pounds a table. It looks like 2 people with legal pads and a very good attorney building something careful and load-bearing piece by piece in a room that smells like old paper and black coffee. It looks like work. It is work. And the only thing that makes it feel like anything other than just work is the knowledge that the thing being built is the only thing standing between you and the version of events that someone else has already decided you deserve. Amber filed a motion that afternoon to delay the disciplinary hearing on procedural grounds. The suspension letter had skipped 2 required notification steps, which made the whole timeline legally vulnerable. The motion was solid. It bought us at least 3 weeks. Then she told us what she was planning to do with those 3 weeks, and I remember looking at Darius while she talked and thinking, this is why you never come to a fight like this alone. Back at Station 9, something had shifted while I was sitting in Amber's office. I found out about it when I walked in the next morning and Captain Okafor was standing in the middle of the common room with her arms folded, waiting for everyone to be present before she said a single word. When the last member of the crew came through the door, she started talking. She told them everything: the suspension letter, the IA chain of command, Warren Malone and his nephew, the prior complaints that had been quietly buried. She told it straight, clean, no softening of the edges. Station 9 was not a crew that needed protecting from hard news. When she finished, the room was still. Then Taurus, 26 years old, 3 years on the job, still in that phase where he approached hard situations with the particular intensity of someone who hasn't yet learned that intensity alone doesn't move anything, looked at Okafor and said, "So what do we do?" She looked at him. "Everything legal," she said, "starting right now." Her first call was to the union. She had the regional director on the phone before 9 a.m. and used the words coordinated retaliation twice without blinking. By noon, the union had assigned a labor attorney named Priya Suresh to my case. She called me that afternoon. Her opening line was, "I've read the letter. They move too fast and skip steps. That's not confidence. That's panic. Let's talk." I liked her immediately. Tyler had been busy in a different way. Quietly. After shifts, making calls, through a network of people he'd known from his 2 years as a county EMT before joining the fire department. He didn't tell me what he was doing, because Tyler was the kind of person who brought results to conversations rather than intentions. 3 days later, he appeared in the doorway of the equipment room while I was doing an inventory check and set a folded piece of paper on the shelf beside me without a word. "What's this?" I asked. "Marcus Webb," he said. Paramedic Pasadena had a run-in with Garrett Malone at a structure fire 14 months ago. Malone physically removed him from a gas leak perimeter Marcus had established, then filed nothing and said nothing when Marcus nearly took it to his captain. He paused. "He's willing to talk, and he said he knows at least one other person." I looked at the paper, at the name and number written on it in Tyler's careful, blocky handwriting. "Tyler," I said. "You would have done it for me," he said, and he walked back out to the bay. "I want to tell you about the morning the clip appeared, because I think it's important that you understand exactly how it felt. Not the anger, which came later and was straightforward, but the first few seconds before the anger arrived, when I was just staring at my phone and trying to process what I was looking at. It was a Thursday. I was at Amber's office, working through the hearing preparation documents at the conference table. Amber's assistant, Kim, opened the door without knocking, and Kim never opened doors without knocking, and she was holding a tablet with both hands and wearing the expression of someone who had been handed a task they very much wished it had gone to someone else. "It's on Twitter," she said. "It's moving fast." 8 seconds. That was the length of the clip. I recognized it immediately. A county emergency services fundraiser, 14 months ago. A heated conversation with a county supervisor named Noel Bright, who had been quietly working to cut fire rescue equipment budgets by 35%, not trimming, cutting, which would have meant fewer hydraulic tools, older air packs, longer response waits in the situations where response time was the difference between someone walking out and someone not walking out at all. I had found out about the proposal 3 days before the fundraiser. I had printed the budget documents. I had gone to that event specifically to confront him about it. What the clip showed: Maya Reeves leaning hard across a cocktail table, hands moving, face tight, eyes locked on a man who is barely visible at the edge of the frame. What the clip removed. Supervisor Bright's 4-minute dismissal that preceded it, complete with the particular smug condescension of a man who has never once run toward a burning building and cannot imagine why anyone would care about the people who do. The budget documents in my hands. The other 3 minutes and 50 seconds of a conversation in which I was direct and passionate and completely right about everything I said. 8 seconds, stripped of every single thing that gave it meaning. The caption read, "Firefighter hailed as hero has history of confrontational behavior." It had already been reposted 1,400 times. 3 right-wing media outlets had picked it up by the time I finished reading the caption. And at 2:15 that afternoon, the LAPD Public Information Office released a new statement. Brief, measured, precisely timed in the way that statements are when someone has been waiting for the right moment to deploy them. In light of newly surfaced footage documenting a prior incident involving Firefighter Reeves, the department notes that Officer Malone may have had reasonable cause to perceive a threat based on the subject's documented pattern of behavior. The department maintains its full support of Officer Malone's conduct. Documented pattern, 2 words, doing the work of an entire argument in the space it took to read them. I set my phone face down on the conference table. Amber was already at her laptop. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. We were past that kind of conversation. "The clip came from a dashcam archive," she said, "which means someone with access to official county footage pulled it, trimmed it at 4 specific points, and fed it to a political commentator with 400,000 followers. That is not legal, and it is traceable." She was already typing. "I'm retaining a forensic video analyst today. I want the metadata, the edit points, the original file length, everything." I nodded. Then I picked up my phone and called Darius. He answered on the first ring. I didn't say hello. "They put a clip out," I said. 8 seconds from the Bright fundraiser, no context, already circulating. A pause. Then, Okay. Maya? His voice was steady in the way it gets when he has already thought through 3 versions of a situation and landed on the one that matters. "They just showed us their hand. They're not trying to defend Malone anymore. They're trying to change what this story is about. That means they're scared." "I'm aware they're scared," I said. "That doesn't make it hurt less." "No," he said. "It doesn't. I'm sorry." A beat. "Come home for dinner tonight. I want you and Imani in the same room." Imani found the comments before I did. I walked into the kitchen that evening, and she was sitting at the counter with her phone in her hand and the look on her face that I had seen on my own face in mirrors my whole life. That specific expression of a person trying to hold something in that is too large for the container. She tried to close the app when she heard me come in. I gently took the phone from her hand. I read for 30 seconds. I gave it back. "Don't read those," I said. "They're calling you a liar, Mom." Her voice was controlled in the particular way of a child who has learned composure from watching a parent practice it but hasn't quite finished learning it yet. "They're saying you went after people. They're saying you've always had a problem with authority." "I know what they're saying. How are you not—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Angry?" I said. She nodded. I sat down across from her at the counter. Outside the kitchen window, the jacaranda tree was doing the thing it did in October, dropping petals in slow sideways drifts that collected in the corner of the yard in small purple piles. I had planted that tree the year Imani was born because I had read somewhere that jacarandas could live for 150 years, and I liked the idea of planting something that would outlast me by that margin. I am angry, I told her. Very. But anger without direction is just noise, and we can't afford noise right now. Then what do we do with it? I looked at my daughter, 10 years old, her father's forehead and my grandmother's eyes, and I thought about how every hard thing I had ever navigated in my life had eventually come down to the same question she was asking me right now. We put it somewhere useful, I said. We give it a job. She thought about that for a moment. Then, like you do at fires. Exactly like I do at fires. Darius came home an hour later. The three of us had dinner. We did not talk about the clip or the comments or the LAPD statement. We talked about Imani's history project and a movie Darius had been meaning to watch for 6 months, and the jacaranda petals I needed to sweep out of the corner of the yard before they composted themselves into the concrete. It was deliberately, consciously normal, the specific kind of normal that you build on purpose when everything around it is not. After Imani went to bed, Darius and I sat at the kitchen table and I let myself say the thing I hadn't said out loud to anyone. There were 2 council members who were publicly supporting me, I said. After that clip dropped, nothing. No statements, no returned calls. I know. They're going to expedite the hearing, aren't they? Before Amber's records lawsuit can produce the IA file. He was quiet for a moment. Probably. So they're going to move faster than we can respond. He looked at me across the table, and I recognized the expression on his face. Not defeat, not worry, but the forward-leaning focus of a man who is already 2 moves ahead and needs you to trust him for the distance. Let me tell you what James Obey found, he said. James Obey was a forensic media analyst who worked out of a small studio in Burbank and had testified as an expert witness in 11 federal cases. Darius had found him through a colleague. He had been working on the dashcam clip for 36 hours straight when we arrived at his studio on a Wednesday evening, the kind of working that produces empty takeout containers and the particular intensity of a person who has found something in the data and needs to see how far it goes. He walked us through it at a monitor that cast pale blue light across the 3 of us in the dark studio. The original recording was 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. The circulated clip was 8 seconds. He had identified 4 discrete edit points, digital fingerprints embedded in the file's metadata, the kind of traces left behind when video is cut and re-exported without professional cleaning. They were subtle. They would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. James Obey had been looking for them. He had also recovered enough of the original file structure to establish what the removed footage contained. Supervisor Bright, speaking first at length in a tone that the analyst described in his clinical, careful language as elevated and dismissive. The budget documents visible in my hands throughout the exchange, and the full context of every single word the 8-second clip had made to look like aggression. The clip was not discovered, Obey said. It was constructed. Someone knew exactly which 8 seconds to pull and why. He produced a 12-page report, timestamp frame analysis, chain of digital custody, his professional credentials on the cover page like a signature on a legal brief. Darius read the first page in the car on the way back. When he finished, he set it on his knee and looked out the window at the freeway lights moving past us and didn't say anything for a long moment. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking," he said, "that someone inside that department made a serious mistake. Pulling the clip? Leaving the metadata?" 3 days after James Obey handed us his report, Amber's phone rang at 6:15 in the evening while the 3 of us were at her conference table. She listened for 45 seconds, said thank you, in a voice that meant the opposite of gratitude, and set her phone down carefully on the table in front of her. She looked at me, then at Darius. "They expedited the hearing," she said. "Internal order filed this afternoon. It's been moved up 5 days from now, before the public records lawsuit can force the IA file into disclosure." The room went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of defeat, the quiet of people recalibrating. I looked at the conference table covered in preparation documents that had just become insufficient for the timeline we were now working with. I looked at Amber, who looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not broken, but carrying something heavy in the way of a person who has fought a lot of these battles and knows exactly how much the next 5 days are going to cost. "How do we respond to 5 days?" I asked. She reached for her legal pad. Darius reached for his pen. And I thought about every call I had ever run in 14 years where the situation was worse than expected and the equipment was less than I needed and the timeline was shorter than anyone had planned for. I thought about what you do in those moments. You don't mourn the plan you had. You build a new one with what you have right now. "We accelerate," I said. Amber looked up at me. Then, for the first time since I'd walked into her office that first morning, something almost like a smile crossed her face. Not warm exactly, more like the expression of a woman who had just confirmed that the person sitting across from her was going to be able to handle what came next. She uncapped her pen. "Then let's talk about what happens in 5 days, she said. Outside, the city moved on in its ordinary way. Traffic and streetlights and the distant sound of a siren that belonged to someone else's emergency tonight. Inside that office, the 4 of us, Amber, Darius, Priya, who had arrived 20 minutes before the call came in, and me, bent over a legal pad and started building the thing that 5 days from now would walk into a hearing room and not leave a single corner of the truth in the dark. I didn't sleep much that night, not from fear, from the particular restless energy of someone who has finally stopped waiting and started moving, who has looked at the shape of the thing in front of them, measured it, and decided that they are exactly the right size to take it apart. 5 days. I had walked into burning buildings on shorter notice than that. The alarm on my phone went off at 4:30 in the morning and I was already awake. I had been lying in the dark for about an hour, not anxious, not running through worst-case scenarios the way I used to do when I was younger and hadn't yet learned that your mind in the hours before something big will invent problems that the day itself rarely delivers. I was just awake, present, the way you get sometimes before a significant call, that quiet humming readiness that isn't quite adrenaline but lives in the same neighborhood. Darius was still asleep. I got up without turning on the light, found my clothes by memory, and went downstairs to the kitchen. I made Amani's lunch first. Ham and Swiss on whole wheat, the crust cut off because she was 10 and had opinions about crusts, an apple sliced into segments, a note tucked under the sandwich bag the way my grandmother used to do for me. Nothing elaborate, just 3 words. "I love you." Then I made coffee. Then I sat at the table in the early dark and drank it slowly and let the house be quiet around me for a little while. When I heard Amani's alarm go off upstairs at 6:15, I went up and sat on the edge of her bed while she woke up. She blinked at me in that foggy, accusatory way of a child being pulled from sleep, and then something in her face sharpened. "Today's the day," she said. Not a question. "Today's the day?" She sat up. She looked at me with those eyes, my grandmother's eyes, patient and steady and older than 10 years had any right to produce. And she said, "You're going to be okay, Mom." I braided her hair the way she liked it, the French braid that took me 8 minutes and that she claimed I was the only person alive who did correctly. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There is a particular kind of closeness that doesn't require words. And that morning in that kitchen, with the light coming gray and soft through the window and the jacaranda tree beginning to take shape in the yard, I felt it as clearly as I have ever felt anything. Darius drove Amani to school. When he came back, he stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching me button the collar of my dress uniform, and the expression on his face was something I will keep for the rest of my life. Not worry, not pride exactly, something more specific than either of those things. The look of a man who has stood beside a person through the worst version of a situation and is now watching them walk toward the resolution of it. "You look like yourself," he said. "I am myself," I said. "That's the whole point." The hearing room was on the 3rd floor of the county administrative building, and I could hear it before I turned the corner into the hallway. Not noise exactly, but the compressed, charged energy of a space that had more intention and than its square footage was designed to hold. When I pushed open the door, I stopped for just a moment. 40 seats in the public gallery, every single one of them filled, people standing 3 deep along the back wall. The air was warm and carried the particular quality of a crowd that had come with purpose. Not curiosity, not spectacle, but the specific gravity of people who had decided that showing up was itself a form of statement. In the front row sat Dr. Sylvia Chen. She was 71 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a blazer the color of deep burgundy, with 7 colleagues from her former hospital arranged in the seats on either side of her, all of them wearing red, for reasons she would explain to me afterward in the plainest possible terms. I told them it was for courage. They all already had some. It just needed a color. She had her reading glasses on and her hands folded in her lap, and she looked like a woman who had testified in federal courtrooms for 3 decades and found the proceedings interesting but not intimidating. She caught my eye when I walked in. She gave me a single nod, the kind that means I see you, and I'm here, and that's all there is to say about it. Rosa Vega was in the second row. I hadn't expected her. She was holding Marco in her lap, 14 months old now, awake and watchful, dark eyes moving around the room with the alert, unfiltered curiosity of a child who finds everything equally fascinating. Rosa looked up when I entered, and she pressed her free hand flat against her chest, over her heart, and held it there for a moment. I had to look away, not because it was too much, because it was exactly enough, and I needed to stay level for the next hour. Darius and Amani were in the third row. Amani sitting straight with her hands in her lap, scanning the room with those wide, careful eyes, and Darius with his arm around her shoulder, watching me walk to the front table with an expression that did not change when I met his eyes. That steadiness, 11 years of it. I don't take it for granted. I never have. Tyler was in his dress uniform, 4 seats down from them, jaw set, looking like he'd been carved from something that didn't bend. Captain Okafor was directly behind my chair. I felt her presence before I saw her. That steady, reliable warmth at my back that I had come to know over 14 years as the particular feeling of having someone genuinely in your corner. Not performing support, actually providing it. Priya Suresh was already at the table, briefcase open, 4 stacks of documents sorted with the precision of a woman who had done this 28 times and knew exactly what order things needed to happen in. She looked up when I sat down. "Good morning," she said. "Let's finish this." Amber took the seat to my left. She set her hearing folder on the table with a sound so quiet and final it was almost like punctuation. She didn't look at me. She looked at the door through which the board would enter, with the focused calm of a person who has already won the argument and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. The 3-member hearing board entered at exactly 9 a.m. They arranged themselves behind the elevated panel at the front, with the careful movements of people who had expected, when they accepted these positions, to spend their time reviewing routine disciplinary matters in rooms that contained 12 people and no cameras. Board Chair Richard Holt, 60-something, silver-haired, the kind of institutional man whose entire professional identity was built around managing things quietly and efficiently, surveyed the packed gallery with an expression that moved very quickly through surprise and attempted to land on composure without fully sticking the landing. He called the hearing to order. He laid out the procedural framework in the careful, flattened language of someone reading from a script. I kept my hands flat on the table and my eyes forward. Then Amber stood up. She moved to the center of the room without hurrying, without performing, with nothing that was not completely necessary. And that economy of movement, in a room that charged with energy, was itself a kind of authority. She opened her folder. She began. She entered the partial IA file disclosure into the record first, every page of it. She read the relevant sections aloud slowly and clearly, in the voice she used when she wanted each individual word to reach every person in the room separately before the next one arrived. The suppressed paramedic witness statement, the 2 prior complaint closures bearing the signature of a supervisor who reported directly to Warren Malone, the structural conflict of interest that had been operating inside that oversight division for at least 3 years. Board member Holt shifted in his chair. The woman to his left wrote something on her notepad. The man to his right had stopped blinking entirely. Then Amber entered Marcus Webb's sworn affidavit. She summarized it briefly, enough for the record, enough for the room. Marcus, sitting in the gallery 2 rows back, did not react. He sat with his hands on his knees and his expression level, the way a person sits when they have waited a long time to be part of something that matters and have arrived at it without fanfare. Then came James Obie's report. Amber placed it on the record with the same unhurried precision she had used for everything else. She did not dramatize it. She simply read the findings, the original runtime, the 8-second clip, the 4 edit points, the recovered context of what had been removed, and let the facts carry their own weight, which they did. The room was so quiet by the time she finished that the air conditioning above us was audible, a low mechanical hum that suddenly seemed very loud. She closed the folder. She looked at the board. "The people in this room deserve the truth," she said, "and we've just handed it to you." She sat down. And then, before the room could exhale, she leaned slightly toward me and said, barely above a whisper, "Now we call Dr. Chen." Sylvia Chen did not hurry to the witness table. She rose from her seat in the front row with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who had long ago stopped measuring herself by anyone else's timeline, smoothed the front of her burgundy blazer, and walked to the chair at a pace that suggested she had all the time in the world and intended to use it correctly. She sat. She adjusted her reading glasses. She folded her hands on the table in front of her. Board Chair Holt leaned toward his microphone. "Dr. Chen, you've been called as a witness to describe what you observed at the scene of the incident on the I-10 overpass. Please, in your own words." "That's why I'm here," she said pleasantly, with the tone of someone acknowledging a statement of the obvious. And she began. She described the accident with the precision of a person who had spent 31 years in emergency medicine, learning to observe exactly what was in front of her and record it accurately. The impact, the way her vehicle came to rest, the limited but unobstructed view she had through the passenger window of the minivan. "I want to be specific about that," she said. "Unobstructed. I could see the white Honda clearly. From the moment the smoke shifted until the moment I was loaded onto the stretcher, I was conscious throughout. I was paying close attention because there was nothing else useful I could do with my situation." She described Tyler reaching her. She described his work, the hydraulic tool, the careful, methodical extraction, with the kind of clinical appreciation of competence that only comes from someone who has watched a great many people work under pressure and knows the difference between good and excellent. Then she described me. "Firefighter Reeves went directly to the burning vehicle," she said. "She forced the door, she cut the seatbelt, she carried the driver away from a car that had active flames moving through the interior. Then she went back in for the child. She stopped for exactly 1 beat. She went back into a burning car for someone else's child." The room was completely still. "When both of them were safe," Dr. Chen continued, "the police officer put her in handcuffs." Holt leaned forward. "Dr. Chen, to be precise, did you observe the interaction between Firefighter Reeves and Officer Malone that preceded?" "I observed the entire interaction," she said, with a patience that was somehow more effective than interrupting him. "From beginning to end, Firefighter Reeves did not raise her voice. She did not make an aggressive movement. She stood in front of that fuel leak because standing in front of that fuel leak was her job. The officer attempted to move past her toward the vehicle. She stepped into his path. He put her in handcuffs." She looked at Holt over her reading glasses with an expression of such complete, untroubled certainty that he actually stopped mid-breath. "That is the full sequence of events, in order, without omission." Holt tried once more. "And you're certain, given the stress, the smoke, the noise—" "Mr. Holt," she said, and her voice had something in it now that was not unkindness but was absolute. "I ran a Level 1 trauma center for 19 years. I have diagnosed under conditions that would make that overpass look peaceful. I know exactly what I saw." The gallery didn't quite applaud. It was more like a collective exhale that had nowhere else to go. Holt raised his hand for order. It took a moment. When Amber made her closing argument, she did not perform. She stood at the center of the room and laid out the complete picture: the arrest, the IAA obstruction, the retaliatory citation, the expedited hearing timeline, and named each piece for exactly what it was. Then she placed her formal request on the record: the disciplinary citation against Maya Reeves to be dismissed with prejudice, and her intent to proceed with the full civil lawsuit unless the county took immediate and visible corrective action regarding both Officer Garrett Malone and Deputy Chief Warren Malone. She sat down. I stared straight ahead. Behind me, I could feel the weight of everyone who had built this with me. Okafor's steady presence, Tyler's rigid stillness, Darius's arm around Imani in the third row. I could feel Rosa Vega somewhere behind me, Marco quiet in her lap. I could feel all of it, and I held it and I breathed. Holt said, "We'll recess." The 3 board members filed out through the side door. The room held its breath. Dr. Chen folded her hands on the table in front of her, settled back in her chair, and waited with the untroubled patience of a woman who had already decided how this ended. 38 minutes. The side door opened. The room went silent in a wave, back to front like something falling in slow motion. And by the time the board had taken their seats behind the panel, the only sound was the air conditioning and the muffled, indifferent noise of the building going about its day outside these walls. Holt arranged his papers. He cleared his throat. He began to read. In the matter of the disciplinary citation filed against Firefighter Maya Reeves, Station 9, Los Angeles County Fire Department. He paused for a fraction of a second, the specific pause of a person about to change the temperature of a room. This board finds the citation to be unsupported by the factual record and inconsistent with established departmental protocol. The citation is dismissed in its entirety. The room detonated. It wasn't applause. It was the sound of something that had been compressed for weeks and weeks suddenly having a direction to go. Dr. Chen's colleagues were on their feet. Someone in the back was cheering. Rosa Vega pressed her face into Marco's hair, and her shoulders shook. Marcus Webb sat perfectly still for 3 full seconds, and then he put his face in his hands. Imani grabbed Darius's arm with both hands, and Darius, composed, controlled Darius, who had sat through 11 years of hard cases with the same steady face, closed his eyes and pressed his lips together and said nothing, which was the most I had ever seen him say without words. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the full weight of what was being lifted, the weeks of it, the carrying of it, the specific exhaustion of holding something heavy in a way that cannot show. And then I opened them because Holt was still reading. He had to raise his voice slightly to be heard over the room. Somehow, that felt exactly right. A board chair of a county disciplinary hearing having to speak over a crowd of people celebrating in order to finish delivering justice. Furthermore, this board recommends the immediate initiation of an independent review of internal affairs oversight procedures within the relevant bureau of the Los Angeles Police Department, with particular attention to case closure processes and supervisory chain of command conflicts in complaints involving active duty officers. He did not say Warren Malone's name. He didn't need to. Every person in that room who needed to understand, understood. Amber set her pen down on the table with the quiet finality of a period at the end of a very long sentence. She looked at me. I looked at her. No words. None were necessary. Priya Suresh, to my right, closed her briefcase with one clean, decisive click. The consequences moved faster than anyone had predicted. By noon, the police commission, not the department, a distinction that carried its own unmistakable message about where the institutional trust had fractured, convened an emergency session. Their statement arrived at 2 p.m. Deputy Chief Warren Malone placed on immediate administrative leave, effective that day, pending independent review. His access credentials suspended. His nephew found out through a phone call. No courtesy visit, no warning. Garrett Malone received his formal notice of disciplinary proceedings the following morning, real proceedings before a board with no structural connection to his uncle, reviewing a complaint file that now included 2 reopened prior cases, the paramedic's recovered witness statement, and Marcus Webb's sworn account. The paramedic, whose statement had been buried for 2 years, received a call from a new IA investigator that afternoon. She asked if she was still willing to give her account. The paramedic said she had been waiting for that call for 2 years. 2 weeks later, Fire Chief Hendricks awarded me the Medal of Valor for the rescue of Rosa Vega and Marco at the I-10 overpass. The citation had been moving through the proper channels since the day of the crash, quietly, correctly, undisturbed by everything that had exploded around it, as if the department had always known, regardless of what anyone tried to make it look like, exactly what that afternoon had been. I kept the medal in its box on the dresser. What I kept closer was the card. Rosa Vega sent it by mail, handwritten on plain stationery, each letter formed with the careful attention of someone for whom the communication was too important to rush. I read it standing at my kitchen counter with the afternoon light coming through the window. You gave my son his whole life. There is nothing I can give you that equals that. But I want you to know. We say your name in this house every single day. I folded it along its original crease. I put it in the left breast pocket of my uniform shirt and pressed my hand flat against it. I have carried it on every shift since. There is one more thing I want to tell you. It happened at the station, a week after the hearing, when both shifts showed up on a Thursday morning for no official reason except that they wanted to be there. Tyler, had set up folding tables end to end in the common room and covered them with enough food to outlast a natural disaster. There was a sheet cake in the center that read Station 9 in yellow frosting with a small plastic fire helmet pressed into the corner that had clearly been sourced from a child's birthday supply pack and deployed here with absolutely no irony. I stood in the doorway and looked at all of them, the people who had filed statements and made calls and driven to other cities and sat at tables building evidence and shown up in a hearing room in red shirts and simply refused, every single one of them, to let this be the version of the story that won. Torres started clapping first. Then everyone joined, and for a moment the bay was full of the specific noise of people who have held something in too long and are finally completely putting it down. I raised one hand. I tried to say something. I found briefly that I couldn't that. And then Dr. Sylvia Chen appeared in the bay doorway behind me, uninvited, holding a bundt cake with both hands, looking around the room with the expression of a woman who had decided she was part of this and was now simply locating the best place to set down her contribution. She found a spot on the table, straightened up, turned to face me, and took both my hands in hers. Not gently, but firmly, the grip of a person who means what they say with their whole body. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said. I looked at her. "How do you know about my grandmother?" "I looked you up," she said simply. "I look everything up. I was a physician." I laughed. It came from somewhere deep and unguarded and unstoppable. The full released laugh of a person who has been carrying something crushing for a long time and has finally completely set it down. It filled the room. Tyler heard it from across the common room and grinned without knowing why, the way people grin when a sound tells them, without any further explanation, that everything is genuinely and truly fine. I've thought a lot about what I want to say to you at the end of this. I've started it several different ways in my head, and I keep coming back to something simple. The system did not save me. I want to be honest about that. The system, left to itself, was working very efficiently toward a different outcome. What saved me was the people who refused to let it. Darius, who spent nights at a kitchen table building something careful while I was trying to hold myself together. Amber, who came to work before dawn and taped org charts to her wall and filed motions at 7:50 in the morning. Tyler, who drove to other cities on his days off and brought back signed statements without fanfare. Captain Okafor, who picked up a phone she had never used for anything small and said exactly what needed saying. Dr. Chen, who showed up uninvited to a hearing room in a red blazer and told the truth with the patient authority of someone who has never once considered the alternative. And you know what all of them had in common? None of them waited to be told it was their fight. They looked at what was happening and they decided it was. I still work at Station 9. I still do my gear check every morning. I still say my quiet prayer before every shift. Marco Vega is 2 years old now, and according to his mother, currently obsessed with trucks, which Rosa says she blames entirely on me. The fuel line that Garrett Malone tried to walk past? My crew cleared it 11 minutes after I walked away from that overpass in handcuffs. Nobody got hurt. The scene was secured. The job got finished. That's what I want you to take from this. Not the drama of it, though yes, it was dramatic, and yes, there were days I wasn't sure how it was going to end. But the thing underneath the drama, the thing that was true the whole time, even when the system was pretending otherwise. Do your job, tell the truth, and find the people who are willing to stand in the same direction you're standing. Everything else, eventually, follows. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if it made you think of someone in your own life who stood in that direction for you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe, because I'll be back with another one. Thank you for being here. I mean that.